Ammianus Marcellinus was a 4th-century Roman soldier and historian. He wrote the penultimate major historical account surviving from antiquity. His work chronicled in Latin the history of Rome from 96 to 378, although only the sections covering the period 353 to 378 are extant. Biography. Ammianus was born between 325 and 330 in the Greek-speaking East, possibly at Antioch on the Orontes. The surviving books of his history, the Res Gesta, cover the years 353 to 378. Military career. Ammianus served as a soldier in the army of Constantius II in Gaul and Persia. He was a former soldier and a Greek, he tells us, and his enrollment among the elite Protectoris Domestici shows that he was of noble birth. He entered the army at an early age, when Constantius II was emperor of the East, and was sent to serve under Ursicinus, governor of Nisibis in Mesopotamia, and Magister Militum. He returned to Italy with Ursicinus when he was recalled by Constantius, and accompanied him on the expedition against Claudius Silvanus, who had been forced by the allegedly unjust accusations of his enemies into proclaiming himself emperor in Gaul. With Ursicinus he went twice to the east. On one occasion he was separated from Ursicinus and took refuge in Amida during the siege of the city, which was then attacked by the Sassanid king Shapur II. He barely escaped with his life. When Ursicinus lost his office and the favor of Constantius, Ammianus seems to have shared his fall from grace, but under Julian, Constantius's successor, he regained his position. He accompanied this emperor, for whom he expresses enthusiastic admiration, in his campaigns against the Alemanni and the Sassanids. After the death of Julian, he took part in the retreat of Jovian as far as Antioch. He was residing in Antioch in 372 when one Theodorus was thought to have been identified by divination as a new emperor, the successor to Valens. Making it clear that he is speaking as an eyewitness, Marcellinus tells us, in his history, of how Theodorus and several others were made to confess their deceit through the use of torture, and cruelly punished. He eventually settled in Rome, where his history would be written. The precise year of his death is unknown, but scholarly consensus places it somewhere between 392 and, at the latest, 400. Modern authors generally describe him as a pagan who was tolerant of Christianity. Marcellinus writes of Christianity as being a pure and simple religion that demands only what is just and mild, and when he condemns the actions of Christians, he does not do so on the basis of their Christianity as such. His lifetime was marked by lengthy outbreaks of sectarian and dogmatic strife within the new state-backed faith, often with violent consequences, and these conflicts sometimes appeared unworthy to him, though it was territory where he could not risk going very far in criticism. Due to the growing and volatile political connections between the Church and imperial power, he was not blind to the faults of Christians or of pagans. He observed in his Res Gesta that no wild beasts are so deadly to humans as most Christians are to each other, and he condemns his hero Julian for excessive attachment to sacrifice, and for his edict effectively barring Christians from teaching posts. Work. At Rome, he wrote in Latin a history of the Roman Empire from the accession of Nerva to the death of Valens at the Battle of Adrianople, in effect writing a continuation of the history of Tacitus. He presumably completed the work before 391. Since at 22, 16.12 he praises the Serapeum in Egypt as the glory of the empire, but in that year the emperor granted the temple grounds to the Christian bishop, which provoked the pagans to barricade themselves in the temple, plundering its contents and torturing Christians, leading to the temple's destruction in the ensuing mob violence. Res Gesta was originally in 31 books, but the first 13 are lost. The surviving 18 books cover the period from 353 to 378. As a whole, it has been considered extremely valuable, being a clear, comprehensive and in general impartial account of events by a contemporary. Like many ancient historians, Ammianus had a strong political and religious agenda to pursue, however, and he contrasted Constantius II with Julian, to the former's constant disadvantage. Like all ancient writers, he was skilled in rhetoric, and this shows in his work. His work has suffered terribly from the manuscript transmission. Aside from the loss of the first 13 books, the remaining 18 are in many places corrupt and lacunose. The sole surviving manuscript, from which almost every other is derived, is a 9th century Carolingian text, Vatican Lat. 1873, produced in folder from an insular exemplar. The only independent textual source for Ammianus lies in Fragmenta Marburgensia, another 9th century Frankish codex which was taken apart to provide covers for account books during the 15th century. Only 6 leaves of M survive. However, before this manuscript was dismantled, the abbot of Hisfeld lent the manuscript to Sigismund Gellius, who used it in preparing the text of the second Froben edition. The dates and relationship of E and M were long disputed until 1936, when R. P. Robinson demonstrated persuasively that B was copied from M, as L. D. Reynolds summarizes. M is thus a fragment of the archetype. Symptoms of an insular pre-archetype are evident. His handling from his earliest printers was little better. The Editio Princeps was printed in 1474 in Rome by Georg Saxel and Bartholomaeus Goldschfram, the worst of the recensures, which broke off at the end of Book 26. The next edition suffered from its editors' monstrously bad conjectures upon the poor text of the 1474 edition. The 1474 edition was pirated for the first Froben edition. It wasn't until 1533 that the last 5 books of Ammianus, a history, were put into print by Silvanus Otmar and edited by Mariangelis Accursius. The first modern edition was produced by C.U. Clarke. The first English translations were by Philemon Holland in 1609, and later by C.D. Young in 1862. Critic Edward Gibbon judged Ammianus an accurate and faithful guide, who composed the history of his own times without indulging the prejudices and passions which usually affect the mind of a contemporary, but he also condemned Ammianus for lack of literary flair. The coarse and undistinguishing pencil of Ammianus has delineated his bloody figures with tedious and disgusting accuracy. Austrian historian Ernst Stein praised Ammianus as the greatest literary genius that the world produced between Tacitus and Dante. According to Kimberly Kagan, his accounts of battles emphasized the experience of the soldiers but at the cost of ignoring the bigger picture. As a result, it is difficult for the reader to understand why the battles he describes had the outcome they did. Ammianus' work contains a detailed description of the tsunami in Alexandria which devastated the metropolis and the shores of the eastern Mediterranean on the 21st of July 365. His report describes accurately the characteristic sequence of earthquake, retreat of the sea and sudden giant wave.